Hello, this is Howard Owens, publisher of the Batavian. We're doing another live stream interview, again, relevant to coronavirus. We're talking with Melissa Fleischut, who's the president and CEO of the New York Restaurant Association. Since restaurants have such a big impact of our economy, especially here locally, I thought it'd be interesting to talk to, and maybe some of our restaurant owners would be interested in hearing from one of the experts in the industry. So, Melissa, how you doing? Good to see you.
Thank you, Howard. I'm fine. I'm healthy. Thank you.
Good. So first of all, there was a press release the other day about maybe this is hitting New York restaurants a little bit harder, and maybe you can explain that to us, and then maybe also differentiate what you're seeing downstate versus upstate.
Sure. So we pushed out a survey from the National Restaurant Association. They're our national partner, and we were asking restaurants what had the impact been on their restaurants. And what we found was that, of course, the industry's been very hard hit, and the unemployment numbers are staggering across the country. At roughly 2/3 of all hospitality employees have been laid off or furloughed. But here in New York, we actually found that they're even worse, and about 80% of all restaurant employees have been furloughed or laid off so far due to the coronavirus.
What have you been seeing about how restaurants weather what's going on right now?
According to the survey results, about half are still open, trying to make takeout and delivery work. Anecdotally, we saw some that were closing initially now start to reopen, try to make that model work, trying to figure out how takeout or delivery or even taking home a meal prep to cook at home has been working in some of the restaurants. So the longer this has gone on, we've seen folks who maybe weren't sure how to make it work at first, now really trying to make delivery and takeout a better model, making sure they have that touch-free carryout, and making it as seamless as possible for the restaurants, paring down their menus to the items that make sense and travel well.
Initially, and you kind of touched on this, I mean, we saw here some restaurants just pretty much right away decide not to stay open. A couple stayed open for a few weeks, and even one that is normally in the delivery business, and his decision was he thought it was safer for the employees. What are restaurant owners telling you about their decisions and why they're making those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, case by case, restaurant by restaurant, of course, as you can imagine. Some of them were concerned that when they started it and tried it, they weren't delivering a consistent product, which was important to their brand, and they didn't want to do anything to diminish their reputation during this time. Others, absolutely took this very seriously and were concerned about public health and didn't even want to risk having being open for takeout and delivery, while others...
Sorry about that.
That's okay. While others really did a great job of trying to find ways to limit the amount of contact with the guest so that everyone felt safer, just, delivering the product out the door, maybe putting it in their trunk or their back seat. So there was very limited contact, and that gave everybody an added level of comfort that it was safe to do that and keep going.
The wanted to talk about the payroll protection program. How do you think that has helped restaurants? Do you think restaurant owners are taking full advantage of that? Have there been difficulties you're seeing with it?
Well, we are starting to hear from members that have been receiving the funds, but now comes the tricky part as to how do they manage the funds now that they've received them in order to get them forgiven and not have this turn into a loan where they're paying interest on it. Many are concerned that it doesn't fit well for New York State because we are probably going to be, on the latter end of reopening. Some of the states have already started to reopen out there, and they're able to bring people back onto payroll and get their restaurants open again. But so far, that's not what we're seeing in New York. And there's also concern amongst the restaurant industry of the amount of unemployment that the employees are currently getting. So, Congress did a good job putting together that unemployment program, but it also is almost contradictory to the payroll protection program. So you have these two pieces of the CARES Act. One, taking care of those employees that were laid off and furloughed, and the other, encouraging employers to try and get them back on payroll. And at the same time, they don't seem to work that well together, at least here in New York. And, there's real concern from the industry. What do I do with these employees if we aren't reopened by June 30th, when this money is supposed to be, used on full payroll and getting those numbers back up? If we aren't open by that date, then what happens? Do they have to go back on unemployment? Do we lose our forgiveness ability? There's still a lot of questions around this program, and we're still waiting on final guidance from SBA.
One thing, you maybe kind of touched on this a little bit. One thing I've wondered about with all the restaurants laying off so many employees at the same time, and whether they bring them back under PPP now or gradually or whatever, if there's a kind of a reopening at once, are restaurant owners concerned that they're going to be able to staff up quickly enough? I mean, there may be employees that decide to switch jobs. They maybe got a different job in the interim. I mean, there could be a lot of complications. What are you advising your members about that?
So labor issues were a big deal before COVID happened, and it was very hard to find good employees and to fully staff restaurants. Unfortunately, going forward, there's a number of factors we think could play into that not being the same problem going forward. So, there's concern that consumer confidence might not be there, that we're going to be limited by, social distancing requirements, so that we won't be able to have a full dining room or have all of our tables available for seating as we go forward. So it's likely that things like that are going to limit the numbers that we can have in the restaurant. So we might not need the same number of staff that we had prior to.
That would seem to maybe complicate things with the PPP loan program then, too.
It certainly does.
Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to ask you about, we have a lot of great locally owned restaurants here, and you might have some thoughts. And this is more for informing consumers. Why are our restaurants important to our community?
Well, what we see is that, they're almost the antithesis of this whole crisis, right? We're social gathering places. We're not social distancing places. But so often we find that restaurants are, the heart and center of a community. So a lot of times when there's a new area that's revitalizing and growing, those small Main Street communities that are coming back and thriving, and it's because the restaurant community was there, and then they opened the doors and welcomed the community and hired people in those neighborhoods. So we really see it as a cornerstone of any community, and we think they're vital to the economy.
Well, I'm a big fan. So
Thank you.
the one of the things that attracted us to Batavia when we decided to open a business here is we just drove around and saw all the great locally owned restaurants. We've always been a big fan of locally owned over chains. I know you probably can't take sides like that, but
They're all members.
yes, but that's kind of us, and we just I think we're very blessed, and I hope that they all of those restaurants pull through. So, in talking about that, I wanted to ask you about advice. One of the things, an article I came across yesterday is other parts of the country is restaurants setting up drive-in theaters, and we're actually hopefully going to be working with a local restaurant and a vendor that we know about that can do this. What other ideas or creative ideas are you seeing from restaurant owners to continue to serve customers and keep up their customer base?
Well, I think figuring out delivery and takeout is really important, and that's going to continue to probably be important even as we start to reopen. Unless sales are back up where they were before this, that they're going to need to have that increased sales ability. So takeout, delivery, those types of things are going to be important to continue to utilize. Some people have seen success with these take-home meals, something very standard, maybe like a platter size or even a prep kit that people could take home and cook themselves. That's a new area for the restaurant industry that we haven't really seen before. Alcohol to go, we would love to see that continue as we start to reopen, just to help supplement sales as we move forward. And there's some restaurants that have done a decent job helping community organizations. So if there's a way for restaurants to help feed the seniors, feed the needy, help with those school meals when kids are not in school, that's all new opportunity, and in part goes to this conversation the governor's having about how do we rebuild better. If there's a lot of food insecurity out there and restaurants don't have the sales numbers where they need to be, isn't there a way that we can partner on that and make it all work so that, that's a problem we could solve together?
I think that's a great thought. I've seen news reports elsewhere where community groups have raised funds and basically hired restaurants to make meals for those in need. That seems like a great community effort. You mentioned what the governor has talked about. Do you have advice for the governor on how to best serve the restaurant industry going forward?
Well, I know he's certainly challenged with health issues first and foremost, keeping the public safe and making sure that we do this in a slow and methodical way. But I guess, I would encourage the governor to consider the restaurant industry and how broad it is, how many people we employ, and think about ways that we can create general guidelines and make everyone safe without getting too detailed and too specific and hand tying too many people, because we represent everything from a small deli pizza place to a huge banquet hall, and their needs are very different, and when you think about all these different organizations, tell them what the guidelines are, that we need to social distance at 6 feet, that we need to wear face coverings, whatever the ideas are that we need to keep people safe, but then let us figure out how to do it in our own restaurants.
One idea I've thrown out before, considering that enclosed environments might present more of a problem, is maybe our local government needs to relax rules on outdoor dining and allow some public parking lots to be used or whatnot. Just in general, would you have advice for local governments on how they serve their restaurant business partners better?
Well, we love that idea. And I would just encourage any local government to think about, how can you relax some of the regulations without, harming public safety or the community, and figure out ways to let us utilize that extra space and find a way to make this work for everybody. I think it's a great idea.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about today, Melissa?
No, I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I think we covered it. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, I really appreciate your time, and good luck to you and all the members getting through this.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So this is Howard Owens of the Batavian with another live stream interview, and thank you to Melissa from the New York Restaurant Association for joining us. And we'll have more coverage throughout the day and more interviews tomorrow, and you all be safe.